Hey everyone, welcome back to an incredibly short episode again. And today I'm joined by Dr. Murwan Siddig.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course. And now, Dr. Siddig, I didn't know if you wanted to just give like a quick background on maybe who you are, how you got to UF, and all that good stuff about everything.
So my name is Murwan Siddig. I'm an instructional assistant professor here at the Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering at the University of Florida. I've been a faculty here since September 2024. Before that, I did a postdoc in RWTH Aachen in Germany for 3 years, and before that, I did my PhD in industrial engineering at Clemson University, and before that, I also did a master's in actuarial science at the University of Manchester in the UK. And I also have my undergraduate in economics from the University of Khartoum in Sudan, where I'm from.
I was gonna want to ask about I guess we can start at the PhD since that was kind of where you transitioned into industrial engineering. And I know that you had a background in operations research, and I was kind of wondering how that maybe came to be, how you ended up choosing that track, coming from a background of economics.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to give a disclaimer that I'm not an engineer. I somehow ended up with an engineering degree, but I do not see myself as an engineer. The way I ended up there is I started my PhD at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. And I started my PhD in mathematics / statistics / operations research. And I wasn't really sure exactly which of these three I want to exactly pursue, but I had one course. It's a very sort of introductory course in operations research optimization. I did have a similar course to that in my undergrad, but what was unique about this course, or the time I took it at VCU, was that it was the first time that I actually had to do coding. And I just sort of fell in love with the entire process of you're giving a problem just in text form, and you need to sort of extract an objective from that, decision variables, constraints, put them together in a compact mathematical formulation, plug that or give that into a computer, so implement it, give that into a computer, and getting back a concrete solution, an implementable solution. And it was also my first time, like I said, coding, and I had to do that sort of on a weekly basis, right? So every week we'll have a homework like this. So the instructor who was teaching that course ended up being my PhD advisor, who a year later ended up transferring to Clemson University to the industrial engineering department in Clemson University. And I followed along, and that's how I ended up with an industrial engineering degree.
I was gonna ask, what did you think of maybe like the learning curve for coding? Because I know a lot of people struggle initially, or it seems maybe more daunting than it is, and I kind of wonder if you had any advice maybe on how to tackle it, if you remember anything from your introduction to it.
Yeah, so in many ways, learning how to code is very similar to learning a language, like kind of a natural language, whether it's English or Spanish or French or Arabic or whichever language you can think of. Typically, languages are sort of classified into natural and formal languages. So natural languages are the ones that we speak on a daily basis, like English, Spanish, and so forth. And then you have formal languages like chemistry languages, the chemical symbols, and mathematical symbols, and so forth. What's different between them is that natural languages sort of evolve naturally, whereas formal languages are sort of constructed by humans. So people sat down and said, okay, we're going to make a language, so it has to follow a certain logic or a certain pattern. And that removes a lot of the ambiguity, right? So in many ways, this is a good and a bad thing. It's good in the sense that it's very predictable, but it's also bad in the sense that you have to be super precise. The moment you like put an extra case or extra letter or something like this, then your code is not going to run. So I say this to kind of at least clarify the analogy between languages in general, and once you sort of recognize that, and if you had to learn another language, or even if you think about how you learn your native language, if you think about how kids speak, they make a lot of mistakes. but they also learn from those mistakes. I think the biggest learning curve is, first of all, recognizing that coding or formal languages are precise, so you have to be very careful about what you write. But you need to also learn how to abstract ideas, how to abstract concepts, and compared to, say, natural language, where you can sort of use metaphors, or you can say things in an indirect way and so forth. So the same thing can mean two different things for two different people. That's not the case in programming. So once you sort of recognize that, and recognize, okay, I need to understand that I have to be super precise. I also need to think about abstraction, the sort of the overall logic, rather than the something that you're trying to convey, or like the emotion or something like this. And obviously practicing, right? So when you encounter a mistake, rather than being intimidated by a mistake, try to think about how you can use that mistake. Why am I getting an error here rather than getting an error there, or something like this?
So, since with it being a formal language, it might be maybe a pain that there's only one correct way to do it. Once you learn that correct way, there's no other way to like misinterpret or derive meaning from something else. It's once you know the phrase or know how to write it, it's absolute, which is I guess different than learning in the formal language, where maybe two words mean the same thing, or you can have different cases like you mentioned. So it's all about knowing the concretes and being able to build around that.
Yeah, I want to be careful about saying that there's only one way to do things in programming, because obviously that's not the case. There are many ways that you can write a for loop or a while loop or something like this. But what I was trying to at least say is that you have to be precise, and precision is specifically in the syntax. Right? If you want to define a function in a specific programming language, there's a very specific format for that. There are certain keywords that you have to use. You cannot name a variable that starts with a plus symbol or not, because the program will say, okay, when you have a plus symbol, you need to add something. So this is kind of a reserved keyword for something specific. So these are sort of, you cannot say I'm using a plus as a metaphor or something like this. So that's what I meant by you have to be precise.
I get it.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I wanted to go to your research background. I know that you studied hurricane logistics and I believe it's evacuation, correct? And or mapping and planning.
So it's evacuation can be part of it, but more broadly speaking, it's logistics, so disaster relief logistics. Hurricanes are one type of disasters. Specifically, I worked on disaster relief logistics in natural disasters that can be predicted in advance. So if you think about a hurricane versus, say, an earthquake, you cannot predict an earthquake, but you can predict hurricane, or at least the landfall time of the hurricane, or the landfall location of the hurricane. You can have an estimate of that hurricane landfall location and landfall time. So these are the kinds of problems, or at least one type of problem that I worked on. But broadly speaking, I work on sequential decision making. So sequential decision making is any problem that is characterized by this repeating pattern of being in some state and taking an action based on that state. So once you take an action, you're going to get a reward or you incur a cost, and then you evolve into a new state. So by state, I mean the information of the world, the state of the system, all the information you need to make a decision. If you want to decide on how much money, how much you're going to invest in the stock market, you need to look at, how much money you have in your bank account, what are upcoming expenses that you have, if you have a holiday that's coming up, whatever. So you look at all the information you need in order to make an informed decision. So that's the state of the system, the state of the world. And you look into that, you look at that, and then based on that you make a decision. Based on that decision, you're either going to incur a cost or get a reward. And then you sort of move into a new state. You evolve into a new state in the future. So this will be how much money you will have in your bank account as a result of that action, right? So when you invest, some money will go out of your bank account, but at the same time, that money might give you some profit or give you some revenue. This might increase how much money you have in your bank account the next time you want to invest, which could be, after 1 second, after 1 day, after 1 year, or I don't know, when an event happened or something like this. And this sort of pattern repeats over and over and over. That's kind of the methodology that I focus on in my research, and it has application in things like disaster relief logistics. So if you want to plan how to or where to pre-position relief items in preparation for an upcoming hurricane, you obviously need to strike a balance between how early you want to start the pre-positioning of the item or items, because you don't want to start too early, because if you start it too early, first of all, the hurricane might change course, so it might change its location, so you might end up pre-positioning things far away from the location in which the hurricane ends up making landfall. And you also have to incur a lot of costs, like inventory costs, transportation costs, might be too far and so forth. And you might not have enough time to sort of shuffle things back into the location where actually the hurricane makes landfall. But on the other hand, if you wait until it's too late, right? So until the hurricane is super close, when you have sort of more accurate information about the hurricane characteristics, like its intensity, its landfall location, its landfall time, you might not have enough time to even deliver the relief items, right? So, roads might be blocked. People might already have some injuries, or even worse, die. So you want to do that as early as possible to circumvent that, or to avoid that from happening. Yeah.
So I guess a follow-up for that would be, so the model, I guess, would iterate based on previous hurricanes and kind of maybe help you determine a timeline for when can you be mostly confident that that direction it's going to go and will not change, as well as being able to estimate based on the scale maybe of the natural disaster how many resources you need to allocate to the specific location.
Yeah, that's a very excellent question. So for these kinds of problems, so the sequential decision-making problem, what does a solution look like? So a solution for this kinds of problem is what we call a policy, which is basically a function that tells you that given this is the state of the world, this is the action that you should take. So it's just a function that maps the state into an action. So you tell me the state, and I'll tell you what the action that you should make. So given that currently the hurricane has these latitude and longitude, so that say the eye of the hurricane has these latitude and longitude coordinates at this point in time, and it's when the wind speed is this, the intensity, the category of the hurricane, or the expected category of the hurricane is this. Where are we going to pre-position the relief items? So I'm going to put them here. I'm going to put X amount here. I'm going to purchase X amount here, and so forth. And then maybe look at the forecast 6 hours later, or 5 hours later, whatever number of periods, or the time units, and then I'll have a new state, right? Because the hurricane sort of the weather conditions are continuously changing, and therefore all of the information that we just talked about is going to is likely to be changing as well. So after whatever number of periods or number of times, then I'm going to look at the state again, and then the policy, that solution is going to tell me this is where I should allocate, or this is how much I should shuffle. Maybe I put a lot here, then maybe I need to move it to this other location. So a solution to that kind of problem is this policy that maps your state into an action. Now, what's the objective when you shuffle things around? This can be many things, right? So you might want to minimize the transportation cost. You might want to minimize the transportation cost plus the inventory cost. You might want to minimize the number of people who don't have access to resources. If you want to include like an evacuation decision, you might want to make sure that you minimize the cost of evacuation, because maybe some roads are getting blocked, and then you might need some helicopters or some like a airplane type of vehicle to transport people from the hurricane landfall location or affected areas. So the objective can be many things, but in general, a solution to this problem looks like what I said, what I refer to as a policy, or what is referred to in the literature, I should say, as a policy.
I was also curious because you had mentioned like a stock market example of, outside factors contributing to maybe how much money you can put in or when to put in money. In these models, is there like an inherent risk factor built in, or is that something that's, I assume tried to be minimized at all times, but I guess I wonder, how do you calculate maybe the risk of the current state of it shifting, or how does that get determined?
Excellent question. So there are many ways to actually handle this. So one way is to have an objective that minimizes this risk. So for example, you can just say that I want to minimize the probability of something happening, or me losing more than X amount of dollars or something like this. Another way to actually put this as a constraint. So you're going to say, I'm going to maximize my profits subject to the probability of me losing X amount of dollars being less than maybe 10% or 5% or something like this. This is one way to do it. Another way is to say, okay, I'm going to maximize the worst case scenario. So maximize the worst amount of, or the least amount of money I can make, or something like this. So it's kind of, in a way, kind of a risk-averse approach to investment, but at least I'm going to make an investment that is very conservative, but it's going to be as high as possibly, or as possible. So there are many ways to formulate this, but you can definitely incorporate how you incorporate your risk behavior, either as an objective or as part of your constraints.
This feels like the merging of all the classes I'm in right now, and it's finally starting to connect, because I'm hearing you talk about OR1 things with constraints and subject to, and then I'm hearing probability things that I'm learning in data analysis. So I think I'm getting a picture of the industrial engineering, getting everything fits together, everything works together.
Yeah, that's a very excellent observation. So OR1, Operations Research 1, is where you study linear programming, or linear programming problem, specifically linear programming problem that are deterministic. So what I mean by deterministic is that you assume that you know everything, right? So you know what your constraints are, you know what your objective is, specifically you know the coefficients in your objective, right? Like if I'm going to get a revenue from a return from investing in a certain stock, you know what the return is going to be in the future. That's not realistic, right? But it's an assumption that we make, at least to kind of start with a solvable problem. And sequential decision making is basically relaxing this assumption, the assumption that we know everything about the future, right? We study these kinds of problems, but rather than saying we know everything about the future, we say that maybe we have a probability distribution about the possible scenarios that could happen in the future, and then we maximize or minimize our objective with respect to some performance criterion. So this performance criterion could be I want to maximize the future expected revenue, or I want to minimize the future expected cost, or I want to minimize the worst case scenario, or I want to minimize the probability of me losing I want to minimize the revenue subject to the probability of me losing money being less than so and so. So it's essentially just relaxing the assumption of knowing everything about the future that you learn about in the very basic linear programming that you solve in operational research.
It's a lot to take in, but I think I'm getting it. I'm getting it. I was gonna then pivot, I guess, because you are teach classes here at University of Florida, but I believe you started teaching at your postdoc, correct, in Germany, or did you even start before that?
Yeah, actually, first class I sort of started to teach from scratch, from top to bottom, I should say, not from scratch, where I was sort of the instructor of record of the classes during my PhD. So I taught actually OR1, so Operational Research 1, linear programming, integer programming, and maybe some network flow problems. So I taught that while I was a PhD student during my PhD at Clemson University. It was also for undergraduate students. Yeah.
And what was the experience like teaching for the first time? Do you think that when you went and you were taught, and it makes you understand the material so much, like as a whole, because you have to be able to not only understand it but be able to explain it? Did that, like, what did that do to your psyche that helped you to become a teacher or professor down the line?
Yes, teaching is, if you think you understand the material, and then you want to teach the material, you really realize that you don't really understand the material. So like, in a way it feels like that. So, but maybe I should say that when you teach something, that's when you really understand the material. This is not to say that, for example, if you get an A, that doesn't mean in a class, that doesn't mean that you don't understand the material. But it's one thing to understand the material at a level where you can just sort of answer questions when asked about it, but it's another level to be able to teach the material and teach it in a way that at least that is comprehensible to everyone else. And people, come to the classroom, people have different ways of thinking about things, so you need to be able to explain the same concepts in different ways to different people. So I think I guess maybe the question was, how did I sort of...
I was thinking that be like, did that make you like fall in love with teaching?
Yeah, absolutely. In a way, I sort of I become alive in the classroom. I feel like I get very excited, especially when I teach something that I enjoy learning about. And so I think I was also very inspired by all the great teachers I had throughout my studies, and definitely the experience of teaching the classroom in a classroom, and seeing the impact that your teaching can have in people's lives is very rewarding. It's the most rewarding part of this job, I would say.
It's seeing the effort someone put in the what they get out, seeing like, I guess, them enjoy the process as well. I'm sure is a good feeling, as you can see that your work has paid off with helping them to understand and further them in their own pursuits and goals.
Yeah. Especially, I would also say, seeing how your teaching can inspire someone to be passionate about something. When a student tells me that, I'm now going into OR, or I'm going into data analytics because of your course. This is, you basically change this person's life in a way, or change the course of a person's life, I should say. And that's not a light thing to say, or light things to even to be told that someone loved your class or has been inspired by your teaching to the extent that they decided to construct their life as a result of that, or based on that. So yeah, very rewarding. It also gives you a lot of responsibility, because you have to make sure that you do your best to live up to the impact of what you say it can have in everyone's lives.
So it's like you have to, by being a teacher or being a professor, you have to kind of live up to your own expectations every time you step in the classroom, and ensure that the people in the class are kind of getting that and can see that in themselves.
Absolutely, yeah. I feel like if I go into the classroom or a classroom and I'm not enthusiastic about what I'm teaching, I think everyone can see that it's not very difficult. So, and if I'm not excited about what I'm teaching, how can I expect everyone else to be excited about what I'm teaching? So I have to be excited, I have to be enthusiastic, I have to show that this is great, you have to learn about this, you should learn about this, it will be valuable for your future career. And I need to convey that whichever way I can to the students, so that they are on board with the message or the learning objectives of the course. Yeah.
And do you find yourself kind of learning every day, almost, of like when you approach a class, you're like, okay, this, or continuously like building on your, or iterating your own style, or it's like this worked or this didn't work, or I feel like if I did this in the next class, I could see better results. Is that something that you actively think about?
Absolutely. So first of all, I always tell everyone in my every at the beginning of every semester, I sort of tell everyone, especially those who I'm teaching for the first time, that my goal is to challenge you as much as you can, right? If you're not challenged, I basically did not do my job correctly, right? So if I'm not, if you don't feel challenged by the end of this course, I didn't do my job. But I also expect the same consideration in return. So if you don't challenge me, then you didn't do your job properly, because you need to challenge me. You need to ask me very tough questions. And I think I have these expectations going into a classroom, and it's not enough to just have this expectation to say, okay, you need to challenge me, but you need to also facilitate that for people to challenge you. And you do this by being open to all sorts of questions that are related to obviously the material. And it happens all the time. If I don't know something in the classroom, if someone asks me something in the classroom, I say, what does everyone think about that? So does everyone can help me answer this question? I'm not going to dictate what needs to. I'm not going to say, okay, this is outside of the scope of this course or something like this, so I can just sort of move away from the question if I feel like it's a valuable question to talk about. But if no one knows it and I don't know it, I tell everyone, okay, I don't know it, but I will let you know next class. And I go back and I try to learn. I do some research. I learn about it. If I don't find an answer, I tell in the next class, I tell whoever asked the question and everyone in class, to be honest, I don't really have an answer yet for this question. And if I have an answer, I sort of share that with everyone in class. So I think you have to facilitate that by being open to receiving questions and having kind of almost like a dialogue with everyone. That you can ask everyone. This is a place where you can make mistake, where you can ask all sorts of questions.
And I think that always helps, like the flow of the class or the atmosphere of the class. People feel more encouraged to talk, or like they want to ask more questions if the professor is open. And like you said, if you say I don't know the answer, being open about that, not just going like my word is absolute, and being receptive to everyone, I think that definitely helps the class kind of come together, and then it raises everyone else up.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. I think one of the things I learned during my PhD is that the most common thing in academia is to say I don't know. As a person, what you learn in your PhD or in the research that you do is very, very tiny compared to the vast amount of knowledge we have in the world. And it's just unthinkable to think that a person knows everything. This just doesn't make sense. So it's very common to say I don't know. So that definitely makes you more relatable to everyone. It sort of humanizes you to everyone. And on the other hand, I also make sure to communicate to everyone that, hey, your job, the reason why you're here is because you want to learn. If you're not making mistakes, then it means that you know everything. And if you know everything, why are you here in the first place? You don't need to be here, right? But the reason why you're here is because you want to learn. And in order to learn, you have to ask questions, you need to make mistakes, and otherwise there's no point of you being here. So I think once people feel comfortable in that way, feel comfortable making mistakes, I think it creates for a very productive and very engaging classroom environment.
And then I'll piggyback off that, and I was gonna go maybe more into UF specific, where I wanted to maybe know what was the most like impactful class that like you've taught, like impactful towards yourself, or most memorable moment. I know these are two pretty different questions, but I like not like best memorable, but like what's the most memorable thing that's maybe happened to you at Florida that you've taken?
Oh, that's a tough question. So I think choosing between classes will be very difficult. It's like choosing between your children
kids.
or something like this. So I don't know if I can do that. Most memorable is also, so I don't have anything that nothing comes to mind, nothing jumps to mind immediately. I'm not sure what is most memorable. There's so many to choose from. So obviously positive or constructive feedback you receive from students is always great. When someone says, "I loved your class," or "You've helped me, learn about this material. Now I like programming because of your course. I didn't like programming before, but now I like programming because of your course." Or I decided to go into data analytics because of your course, or something like this. These are always very sort of inspirational moments. That this is what, to me, this is what all this job is about, is for moments like this. But I don't know if there is one specific moment that I can point to.
Okay. And then I think that's about all the questions I have for you. Thank you, Dr. Siddig, so much for joining me today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Yeah, I enjoyed this. Thank you.
Yeah. And I look forward to taking OR2 next semester.
Yeah, I look forward to having you in my OR2 class.